It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George LiveLine. This one's on Facebook, and it's going out to a lot of local groups because this is a local story, folks. We had a round of killer tornadoes this past weekend that visited the heartland, an extremely unusual storm at an extremely unusual time of year. And we've got an expert joining us on the podcast by George LiveLine today to talk all about it. Take your questions and comments and tell us exactly what happened, why it happened, how it happened, and I don't know, get his opinion maybe on whether or not it's going to continue to happen. Our guest is Dr. William A. Gallus, Jr. He's a professor of meteorology and has been at Iowa State University for over 25 years. His research interests include improved understanding and prediction of thunderstorm systems, their evolution, rainfall, and severe weather, as well as prediction of winds for wind energy. Convection allowing numerical models such as WRF are an important part of his research. He also looks at how climate change might impact extreme weather events. So let's take that on down and bring him on in here and say good morning to our guest, Dr. William Gallus. Hi, Doc.
Hi, George. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm going to start us off here because Dr. Gallus only has a half an hour with us this morning, so I want to get to this right away. And I'm going to start off with this latest overview, the reporting from the Associated Press that I saw. And it's important that we start this way because we're going to be talking in kind of, clinical ways, picking apart this storm. But, I mean, this is the most human of events, folks. People died in this storm. Little children died in this storm. People were injured. Property was lost. Lives were ruined. So let's get to this article here. It says, mother, 4 of 7 killed in Iowa tornadoes were from the same family. And that's one of the iconic drone photos that you'll see. 2 kids, a father, a grandma, died in rural Winterset, Iowa. 4 of the 7 people killed in devastating storms that tore through central Iowa were members of the same family who were huddled together in the pantry of a home that was raised by a powerful tornado, authorities said. 2 children, their father and their grandmother, all died Saturday when a tornado hit the grandparents' home near rural Winterset that didn't have a basement. Family members said the children's mother, 8-year-old brother, grandfather, and uncle survived the storm, but they were injured. Okay, I'm going to continue with this article, Doc, but I want you to jump in here right away. This home did not have a basement. I mean, there are other ways to keep yourself safe other than having a basement. But I mean, do you still recommend that as a weather observer? Or, when I was a kid, we used to have what they call Frady holes. We used to have those storm cellars outdoors. They were inexpensive to make. They weren't nice to be in, but you didn't go into them unless you absolutely had to, such as a storm like this. I mean, are those types of things still recommended?
Right. Basically, how safe you're going to be in any of the places we tell you to go in your home is related to how intense the tornado is. If you get a tornado like this that was EF4 or 5, you almost have to have a basement, or even better, a tornado shelter, or like you said, a Frady hole, to really ensure that you'll stay safe. If this had only been an EF1 or EF2 tornado, being in an interior room like the pantry or the bathroom probably would have been enough to protect you. So when you hear those guidelines, they really should be stated kind of in an order. If you want to be a little safe, get into a pantry or a bathroom. If you want to be more safe, if you have a basement, get into that. And if you want to be as safe as possible, go into a specifically designed tornado shelter, or, like you said, a Frady hole. So it just was unfortunate that this was such an intense tornado.
Now, there were a couple of things that they used to tell us back in the day, which have kind of been disproven. One of them was you could tell whether or not a tornado was nearby by turning on your television. This was when it was broadcast and the screen would turn white and all that. It was just a bunch of baloney. They finally came out and said you do a much better service to yourself by finding shelter than fiddling around with your television when a tornado is approaching. But the other part they used to talk about was even in the basement, but if you couldn't get to the basement, go to a certain corner of the home. But that's not necessarily absolutely true in all circumstances because of the storms themselves, right?
Right. It used to be that they told you to go into the southwest corner. The idea is tornadoes move from southwest to northeast. So you would be hit first in that corner, and all of the debris from your home would be getting blown away. Since it's really the debris that is flying around or falling that kills people in tornadoes. But I think after looking more closely, they realize that since the winds in a tornado are spinning around, really you're just as likely that everything that was to your northeast in your house is going to go around backwards and fly into the southwest corner. So pretty much what they replaced that with is don't just go into your basement, but get under something sturdy in your basement to protect you from all the things that are likely to fall into your basement. And I know with some of the damage near Winterset, people have been posting pictures that lots of very heavy objects fell into basements, and so you could have even been in your basement and still risked severe injury or death if something like your refrigerator falls into the basement, or cars. Cars are often blown and end up in basements.
And in this instance, in Winterset also, I think a life might have been saved by a couple getting into a bathtub. That's not a horrible idea, getting into a bathtub in a bathroom in a small enclosed space like that.
Right. So yeah, if you have no basement, the safest place would be a bathroom, especially if it's in the interior of your house, and to get into the bathtub. But George, I think in that story, what I had read is one person was saved, but I think their husband laid on top of
Yes.
them to protect them, and he was killed.
Yes.
So, if you're in the bathroom, oftentimes you're going to end up riding along, flying through the air in the bathtub. And some people survive that, but you could be unlucky as well, and it won't protect you very well.
All right, let me go back to this article because that's a couple of things that I wanted to touch on right off at the top. To continue here, the children and their parents from Blue Springs, Missouri were visiting their grandmother, Melissa Bosley, 63, when the tornado hit. And I apologize if I'm not getting that pronunciation correct. I don't know these folks, obviously. The storm killed Bosley, 37-year-old Michael Bulger, and two of his three young children, 5-year-old Kinley Bulger and 2-year-old Owen Bulger. My God. Now, folks, a GoFundMe page for the family says Carrie Bulger, who is the children's mother and Bosley's daughter, was hospitalized and then was later released. You can go to the GoFundMe page and make your donations and contributions there. And again, just the lefty in me, I'm not going to get real political here, obviously, during a podcast like this, but I'm hoping the government will step up, get down there and help those folks. I know the governor was down there, but low interest loans is, they need something more than that. People are going to the GoFundMe pages and they're not making low interest loans. They're giving these people money. So I would like to see the government do this. Let's continue on to read here. I want to hit some of these highlighted areas. 2 others killed in the tornado. 2 others. Rodney Clark, not related. Cecilia Lloyd, 72, lived in homes just down the street from Bosley that were also hit by the tornado. It was rated an EF4 with peak winds of 170 miles per hour, the National Weather Service said Monday. The tornado was on the ground for nearly 70 miles, leaving the longest path of destruction since a 1984 tornado that carved a path 117 miles long. The 7th death came from Lucas County, about 54 miles southeast of Des Moines, when a separate tornado struck less than an hour later, injuring several other people. Officials there said Monday that Jesse Throne Fisher, 40, of Sheraton, Iowa, died in the storm, and another area resident remained hospitalized. The State Department of Natural Resources said that Fisher was in an RV at Red Hawk State Park near Sheraton when the storm struck. Okay, I'm going to take that story down. I mean, my God, that's just so tragic. I can't hardly stand to read it anyway. But I obviously an RV would be about the worst place to be, Doc.
Right. And, I read more about that story, in fact, just this morning, that the reason that the pair were in the RV is that their home had burned down not long ago. The other thing that you mentioned, how unusual it is that it came this early. And it certainly was bad news for the people that were hit because it snowed, a day later. But if you think about it, if it was more during normal tornado season, that state park would have had far more
Oh,
people in
yeah.
it, and it would have been likely a much worse tragedy.
Yeah, I've thought about that in the past. So state parks are really at risk because oftentimes the storms do come during the summer when the parks are full. They're not tied down. They're just there temporarily. Most of them are. And those things are not safe under any circumstances. Now, I think most of the parks do have shelters. I mean, places where you can run to and get shelter. But I don't know if that was available to those folks that died tragically, or that gentleman that died tragically down there or not. Again, that was Red Hoss State Park.
Right. In Georgia, in fact, I read that they did try to go to the shower house. Most campgrounds,
Oh.
that often is the place of shelter, but because it's the off season, it was locked.
Oh my God. No kidding. Oh wow. Okay, I'm gonna check over here. Um, we're getting some comments from some viewers. Yeah, there's one, and the doc already covered that. That is true. The husband was on top of the wife, and she survived. He may have saved her life by being on top of her in the bathtub. And again, that underlines what we were talking about to begin with. This is the most human of all stories. Well, I wanted to get to this next slide and bring this up because this has to do with the forecasting. And Doc, I know that you follow this very closely, and there's a lot of criticism of weather forecasters. A lot of times they're accused of crying wolf, but I thought they did an excellent job on this one, and this is evidence of it. This was from 8 o'clock in the morning on Saturday, and it is the overview, the approximate timing of severe risk, it says. Approximate timing of the broken line of thunderstorms that will pose the highest risk of severe weather, including tornadoes, damaging wind gusts, and large hail. Earlier storms before this line may pose a risk of large hail. And if you look at these demarcations here, and then the timeline 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. right here in the central part of the state, including Winterset, I mean, they were spot on with that, Doc.
Right. The forecasts for this event were actually in some ways better than the December, derecho and tornado outbreak here in Iowa. The Storm Prediction Center, which issues the official outlooks for the country, actually indicated that Iowa had a risk of bad storms 5 days, I think 4 or 5 days before it happened. Maybe the one thing that there was a little bit of uncertainty about was what would the tornado risk be. We knew there was a risk of very strong winds for Saturday, but by I think Friday, it became pretty obvious there would be some tornado risk. And as Saturday went along and some sunshine made it up into southwest Iowa to give a little bit more energy to the atmosphere, then the risk of tornado really, went up. And the forecasts were excellent, especially from the National Weather Service here in Des Moines.
And I can identify with that because you and I have talked on an earlier broadcast. I walked outside earlier in the day and I said, oh, this is juicy. I mean, you got this sense, this moisture in the air this time of year. And of course, you've got cold air every place. This is not a good combination. I see why they're making this forecast. But I got to tell you something. I wasn't a believer until the thing hit, really. And I guess it's because forecasts always kind of assume the worst. They want to make sure everybody is warned because you can lose your life. You can be injured for life. You can lose everything that you have. So they always err on that side. Sometimes it doesn't happen. But I got to tell you, Doc, when it comes to these derechos and this most recent storm, I'm going to take these forecasts a lot more seriously. I think they're more accurate and should be paid more attention to than ever before.
Right. And I commented, I moved to Iowa 27 years ago from the eastern part of the country. And most of that time, it almost seemed to me that Iowa was incorrectly called part of Tornado Alley, that we didn't have these classic textbook setups happening that we know bring tornadoes. And, now in less than a year, we had this big tornado outbreak last July. We had the tornadoes in December and now March. It almost seems to me that we've gone back to how the past has often been in Iowa. And it's kind of a little bit concerning But the forecasts, right, have been correctly notifying everybody of the risk because these events have just been classic. I was out tornado chasing in two carloads of students. And when we saw the sunshine working its way into southwest Iowa on Saturday afternoon, I said, this is classic. This looks exactly like what happens when you have a big tornado outbreak. And sadly, we did have that happen in Iowa.
Yeah, it's classic, but if you look at your calendar watch, there's nothing classic about that. I mean, I told everybody that it used to be the old homage, the old saw was we had blizzards during the state girls basketball tournament. Well, it just wrapped up. The state boys tournament was underway, and we've got a tornado outbreak. That part of it is that's not normal. That's not classic at all.
Right. It's as though nature is confused. So the maps looked classic for what typically happens in late April or May here, but it was happening when there were still snow piles around, in early March. And this actually became the furthest north that a violent tornado, an EF4 or EF5, has ever hit in the United States this early in the spring. So it was very unusual from that aspect, that the tornado was so strong and happening in early March. I think we had one EF4 tornado before in Iowa in March, but it was at toward the very end of the month.
Well, so another historic record-breaking event connected to weather and undoubtedly, in my mind, to climate. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but let me bring up this next map here. So talk us through this a little bit.
So this is the National Weather Service in Des Moines displayed this. This is the official forecast from the Storm Prediction Center down in Norman, Oklahoma. And so Saturday morning, they issued this. It's pretty rare to get into the orange color. The orange color means there's an enhanced risk of severe weather. When they issued this in the late morning Saturday, they had upped things to this orange color in southern Iowa based on the fact they felt more confident that there'd be extremely strong winds. But then in early afternoon, right before the tornadoes got going, they actually increased the chance of tornadoes in that same area to a level that is pretty rare. I think, they call it a 10% chance that a tornado would pass within 25 miles of any point, which was the same outlook that was issued on December 15th when Iowa set the record for the most tornadoes in one day. So this was definitely a high-end threat on Saturday.
Well, again, to go back to what I said earlier, I'm a dummy. I'm not a meteorologist like the doc. A lot of this is colors to me. I mean, yellow you might want to pay attention to. Orange you better pay attention to, and red is just what it implies. It's not a good thing. Now, normally in the past, I wouldn't have paid that close of attention to a map like this. I'd go, yellow, maybe some orange. But again, now moving forward, I'm going to pay more attention to these things.
Right. And as you said, one level higher than orange would have been red. We were in red, a big chunk of Iowa on December 15th. Eastern Iowa was in the red when the derecho happened in August of 2020. There's one level higher than that purple. And yeah, you don't really want to end up in the purple.
No, never be in the purple. My God. Okay, so let's take this one down and bring this up. Okay, so now we're getting to the storm coming to Winterset. This is a photo off of Twitter. And to me, this kind of looks like an iconic type of tornado photo, Doc.
Yeah, what it reminded me of was probably Iowa's most famous tornado, the Jordan, Iowa tornado from 1976.
Yes. I interviewed somebody with the National Weather Service about that Jordan tornado. Now, was that one of the E5s?
Yes, that was at the time, right? We used the F scale, so it was an F5.
F5, yeah.
Iowa hasn't had very many. I think after that F5, the next F5 that we had was Parkersburg in 2008.
And I've got something to show on that too. Now, just clarify or explain to folks, this F5, EF5, they went to an enhanced rating scale. What's that all about?
So when they changed the scale, the main thing they did is they wanted to provide the people that go out and classify the tornadoes with better, more precise pictures of all the different kinds of damage. So there's indicators for mobile homes, for regular homes, for schools, etc. So they tried just to come up with a more standardized scale. So, somebody in Des Moines doing the survey would call it an EF4. Somebody from Denver would have also considered it an EF4. And they also adjusted the estimated wind speeds associated with the tornadoes. We used to think, for instance, that an EF4 might take 250 mile per hour winds to do the damage that it does. But a panel of experts now decided that 170 miles per hour, would be able to do that same amount of damage.
Okay, so let's move along here and bring up another slide. I want to show this one in particular because the storm in Winterset had this ghastly Jordan wide angle look to it, and then as it moves along, same storm, same line. This is just outside of Norwalk, and people know that, that's what, 15 miles, 20 miles up the, well, maybe I'm not sure on my mileage, but it's not far from Winterset. And so this is what they're starting to see in Norwalk. This is tornadic, but it doesn't look like what we saw earlier.
Right. Even if you watch some of the videos near Winterset, this tornado was what we call multiple vortex a lot of the time. It's kind of related to the amount of air rushing into the tornado compared to how much rising motion is in the thunderstorm. And so a multiple vortex tornado looks kind of drunk, kind of disorganized, with all these little other tornadoes that can be spiraling around. So at times near Winterset, it congealed into this one big tornado. At other times, it looked like multiple pretty intense tornadoes. By the time it got to Norwalk, I think there's probably more than just the one obvious vortex that you see in this picture. It almost looks to me like off to the right, further back in the distance. It was still multiple vortices associated with it, but the winds had become a little weaker. I believe I heard the Weather Service say some of the damage around Norwalk was more like an EF2.
Oh, okay.
Fortunately for us, it's pretty hard for Mother Nature to keep a tornado at EF4 strength for a very long distance. So oftentimes the strength, ebbs and flows as it's moving along.
There it is again, showing it moving towards Norwalk. Okay, so from Norwalk, where's Podcast by George? Well, folks, it was moving my way. I wasn't out chasing like the doc and his students were. I was in line. I didn't have to chase it. It was coming to me. Now, as it approached, I could tell. I mean, I was looking at it, and I had seen this felt this atmosphere earlier in the day, and I thought this has the potential to be very bad. Then it happened. Then I went out in the yard with my my phone camera and shot this video. Now, I'm just on the east side of this, looking to the west as this line moves in. And let's play some of this video, and then I'm going to unmute my mic and ask the doc to do the same. And maybe if you can hear us over the wind here, you'll be able to talk. We'll be able to talk a little bit through this. So let's start this video. Now, this was shot by Podcast by George, folks.
So George, one thing I find interesting in this video, you can hear, I believe, the roar, certainly the sound of the wind from the tornado, even though the tornado appears to be pretty far away. And that was one thing that was tricky about Saturday, is the air was so humid that the base of the clouds was close to the ground, and that can really kind of work how far away. That doesn't make that can be a little dangerous if you assume it's further away than it is.
Now, have I got anything significant on the screen here? Does that look like a little bit of a vortex or not?
That could be. I was also looking, more just above the trees in the distance. It almost looked to me that there was the shape of a funnel back there. And I do know from some other videos, I believe prior to when it hit Winterset, you could really hear the roar even though you weren't necessarily seeing. Right, that's kind of what I was curious about, if that might be the tornado video. But I think you could hear it even though you couldn't necessarily see the clouds that sometimes form inside the spinning air. Okay, Doc, so I got a question. Why do you see these white things in the middle of all the dark sky? What is that? So that is low areas of cloud. We call it scud clouds. So that's implying, the air is very, very humid, almost to the point of creating fog. And so typically you might see some of this near a tornado because the air is becoming very you have a lot of rising motion happening near the tornado, and anytime you start to lift the air, it is so humid it instantly forms into bits of cloud.
It almost looks like smoke in the air,
Right.
which is very unusual. But I shot that video and then I went inside and I told everybody that was on Facebook that was looking at my stuff anyway that I had this video and that this was going to be bad. I've seen a lot of these, and there's going to be a lot of devastation associated with this. I knew that there would be looking at it then. Okay, so let's talk devastation. Some of the earliest reports, I think, came in saying it was maybe an EF3 down in Winterset. That was later upgraded to an EF4, which is, I think, where it's going to stay. Well, let's take a look at an EF5, folks. This is Parkersburg, Iowa. And as it says there, that's May 25th, 2008. It's one of only 11 E5 tornadoes in Iowa history. And of course, this one was notable not only because of its violence and what it did to the homes and lives of people in Parkersburg, but the size of it was massive, Dr. Gallus.
Right. The one that happened on Saturday was also impressive. At its widest, it was 800 yards wide, about half a mile wide. So it was getting close, I believe, to how wide the Parkersburg one was. And I think if the one on Saturday had been about a mile further north, you would have seen scenes like this from Winterset, not too much different.
I knew a guy for a while. He told stories about this. He was from Parkersburg and told stories about it. It was something else. The power of nature is just unbelievable. Okay, so I wanted to bring this up again. This is Parkersburg, and the photos, the depictions of the tornado aren't what they base the rating scale on. It's the aftermath. It's what it does as far as destruction is concerned. It's kind of like we talked about derechos. You said a lot of that analysis, even the determining of whether or not it is a derecho, is done afterward. And that's the way with this EF5. They quantified it that way because of what it did. Let me go back to that slide, because it did this.
Right. In fact, the difference between an EF4 and an EF5 can be if your house is built on a concrete slab. If it's hit by an EF4, it's totally destroyed, but the debris tends to still be remaining on the slab. In an EF5, you look to see that the slab is swept completely clean.
Wow. Just scoured. That's kind of the way that I put it. Well, I just looked at my watch. I knew this would happen. We're running out of time already. Doggone it, Doc. And again, I can't finish this without talking about the loss of life and the lives ruined down there in Winterset, Iowa, and in Sheraton at that RV state park, Red House State Park down there. I want to make sure that everybody understands that I get it and the doc gets it. I mean, it's a personal thing. We can look at these scientifically and we can look at these as far as maps and modeling and all that's concerned, but these are human lives. Doc, before you take off here, and we'll get you back pretty soon. I hope we don't have another killer tornado to talk about next time you come on, but how would you like to close? What would you like to say to folks here as we recover slowly but surely from these killer storms?
I think in a way we can try to turn this into learn something from it and maybe save lives this year. So this happened before our normal tornado season in Iowa, but so that means we're going to be entering the next couple months where things like this are more likely to happen. So it'd be good to consider, what would you do if you knew a tornado was coming or you heard about a tornado warning? If you have friends nearby that have a basement and you don't, it can be really good to maybe go there when the tornado is coming. You don't want to have to be maybe in your car driving very far, but if it's just a neighbor, you're much more safe in a basement than you would be, say, in a pantry or in a bathtub. And again, just think what you were doing on Saturday and how you learned about what was happening in the path, and make sure you have a plan in place as we go through the heart of tornado season in the next 3 or 4 months here in Iowa.
That's great. That's a great closing comment. And the way that I put it to people, and I mentioned just recently, it's natural to think that things are going to get better. That's kind of human nature. But with this climate situation that we're dealing with, this ain't natural. I mean, it's likely, I think, that we're going to see more of these, that it's going to get worse and it's not going to get better unless we can find some way to mitigate the climate catastrophe that is descending upon us all. And I think this is just a small little clue, a little piece of evidence of the climate situation. Doc, I know you got to run. Thanks again for coming on this Podcast by George LiveLine.
Well, thanks, George, too.
Folks, that's Dr. William A. Gallus, Jr. He's a professor of meteorology up there at Iowa State University. He's been there for over 25 years. And he's a great guy to come on the show. He's a friend of Podcast by George. And I really enjoy having him on there to do this analysis of these killer storms that moved across Iowa just a few days ago. And if you like seeing folks like Dr. William Gallus, if you like participating in a show like this, please go to podcastbygeorge.com. Just log on there and pick a platform where you would like to be notified of upcoming shows, everywhere from YouTube to Facebook to Stitcher to Spotify, the iHeartRadio app, any place that you get your podcasts. Go in there and like and subscribe to Podcast by George. It's all free. But that's going to do it. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.